To my good friend, Mr. Mike Conaway from Lubbock, Lubbock from Midland, Texas, and played for Odessa Permian. Know something about being in the tough. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. But I would yield to my friend.
All right, thank my friend from Sweetwater, Texas. Oh, I'm sorry, Tyler, Texas. I can actually pronounce your last name, Mr. Gohmert. No, thank you. I appreciate being with you today and look forward to our conversation with each other and the other members of the House who are filling almost every seat in the chambers this afternoon. We want to talk about fiscal responsibility. That's been a buzzword that has rolled off the lips of just about everybody from the administration who has come over the last couple of weeks after the president announced his budget. The president stood here during his address to the nation and called us to some tough things, to some hard things that we're going to have to do in the coming future. I had hoped one of the things that he would have said was that we have some hard things to do, some really tough spending decisions to make. We can't afford everything that we've been spending money on. We can't afford all of this federal spending. We have hard decisions to make. We have to set priorities. And I hope what he was said to us that night was, and we're going to start tonight. And he would have turned around and looked at the Speaker and said, Madam Speaker, send me a continuing resolution or an omnibus bill that spends no more money in fiscal '09 than we spent in fiscal '08. In other words, let's start that down payment on hard decisions. Much of that increased spending, the $32 billion of increased spending in the '09 omnibus bill that had passed this, now has subsequently passed this House, is for new programs. It duplicates spending that was done in the stimulus bill. And so there's really precious little reason to argue that we needed to spend more money in the regular appropriation process for fiscal '09 than was already being spent in '08 and the stimulus package itself. But he didn't say that. He convened a fiscal responsibility summit on a Tuesday and then released his budget for the fiscal '10 spending on that following Thursday. And we've had some hearings here in the Budget Committee and others about that budget. It's many of his appointed hired guns have come over to us and looked us in the eye, looked these cameras in the eye in the committee hearing rooms and said, this is a fiscally responsible budget. Well, I have to argue that because that's a little bit different definition of fiscally responsible than any I've ever heard. The budget itself calls for and he's bragged about cutting the deficit in half by the fifth year, or cutting it down to $533 billion. And that's a good goal. I mean, we should all be about cutting deficits, and that we should never, make light of how difficult that is to do. But then if you look at the next 5 years of his budget, his deficits go right back up. I think the last budget on the 10-year window is about a $700 billion deficit. So how can you, with a straight face, say that that deficit that's got the cumulative deficits over a 10-year period that more than doubles the existing debt that we owe to outsiders, how can you remotely call that a fiscally responsible budget? You then look at the stimulus spending that was anything but responsible. It was put together in the Speaker's office with precious little input from those of us on our side of the aisle, which I'm sure there are evidences in past history where the Republicans have run roughshod over the Democrats. But clearly, two wrongs don't make a right, and we had no input into the stimulus spending package. This was going to be kind of the gift that keeps on giving to embarrass those who voted for that stimulus package. I believe over the next 2 years we will see spending after spending after spending on things like Frisbee golf courses and other kinds of things that this money will get spent on that will embarrass anybody who voted for that stimulus package. So we'll see these coming out over the next couple of years. The omnibus bill that we just passed, we gave our colleagues on the other side of the aisle an opportunity to say, all right, let's just spend do what I hope the president would tell us to do in his address to the nation the other night, and that is hold this spending flat. Let's start the process, because it's going to be hard. When you cut federal spending, somebody somewhere doesn't get paid. There's a job loss somewhere. There's a benefit that doesn't happen. But this, where we find ourselves today is that every dollar of the stimulus package was borrowed. 430. The deficit this year, which will be exacerbated by that $31 billion increase, that $31 billion has to be borrowed. Now, this money, under a normal borrowing scheme, you go to a lender, could be a bank, could be someone else, and you set up the loan, how you're going to get the loan, what you're going to use the proceeds for. But the lender is particularly keen on how he's going to get, or she's going to get paid back. Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, this debt that we're borrowing, the $700+ billion on the stimulus package, the extra $31 billion in the on the omnibus bill, that debt will never get paid back, ever. Because the only way you can pay back debt is to run a surplus. And this government does anything but run surplus as well. I had an interesting conversation. I was in Fredericksburg, Texas, back in October, and I was doing a town hall meetings around the district, talking to constituents and hearing their opinions, what was going on. I'd gone to a particular school and was doing the town hall meeting for just the school itself. And I was taking questions from the folks in the school. And I had this young fifth grader raise his hand, and so I got around to calling on him, and he looked at me and said, Mr. Congressman, what's the plan to pay off the national debt? And I kind of rocked back on my heels. I said, I beg your pardon? Which is a technique you use when you're taking questions like that to gain time to think. And I said, I beg your pardon? He said, yes, sir. He said, what's the plan to pay off the national debt? And I said, young man, that is the single best question I've ever been asked at a town hall meeting. And the bad news is there are no plans to pay off the national debt. We would be tremendously excited around here if we could just run a balanced budget, if we just quit making the process worse than it already is. And there are no plans, certainly over the next 10 years in this president's budget, to even go to break even, to quit making the problem worse. And so the insidious thing about this debt is that we're not going to pay it off. It's not likely that future generations are going to pay it off, but there is an interest carry on that debt. That debt, and right now we're benefiting from low interest rates because the rest of the world has fled into the safety of what they believe are the safe security, the U.S. debt securities, and so our interest rates are low. But as we begin to roll out this debt and borrow additional trillions, doubling of the national debt, interest rates will go up. But so whatever the interest carry is, whatever the annual interest rate is on that debt is a permanent call, a permanent obligation that we are handing off to future generations. It will reach that interest alone will reach $1 billion a year very quickly as we borrow additional money here very, very soon. So those are resources that have yet to be earned. That's taxes that have yet to be collected. And those future generations will, in effect, inherit a hole in their budget of whatever that interest rate is, or whatever that interest carry is on what we have borrowed. We have taken the process of fixing our problems with other people's money to a staggering art form. And it's weaning ourselves from that concept is going to be hard to do. We've never done it, and our generation hasn't done it. The generation ahead of us didn't do it. But future generations will have to, because while it appears that this federal government has a limitless ability to borrow money, that's not true. There is a finite amount of money that this federal government can borrow. I don't know that we're there yet, but every dollar we borrow and the trillions we're adding on, we are getting closer to that point at which the rest of the world says, you know, I'm not sure America can make good on its debts. And once that happens, then we're in for remarkably different circumstances. So I want to thank my good colleague from Tyler, Texas, for allowing me to help out this afternoon and be a part of this conversation, and look forward to the comments from he and our other colleagues.